unexpected at peak dinner hours. So thank you all very much for wanting to come and watch this. I appreciate it. My name is Jeremy Reeves, head blender for Cornell and Deal Pipe Tobacco Company, and I am going to demonstrate to you a way that one of my favorite old C&D blends comes together. It's called Byzantium, and it's just three components. It's Latakia, Oriental, and Perique. And partly I chose this blend because I just love the way that these three ingredients work together so well in the balance that is created in the proportions that C&D put them into. But also I chose this blend because I think that these components in and of themselves are really compelling and interesting subjects to discuss. The base of this tobacco is Turkish. So Turkish tobacco is grown in regions where we don't really think of tobacco as coming from. It comes from high desert areas. The tobacco plant is not, like the big broadleaf, rich soil tobacco that we think of seeing in, say, Kentucky or Tennessee. Uh, this is a short plant. It's in constant direct sunlight in this arid climate, and so there's not a lot of moisture. There's not a lot of nutrition in the soil. It's eking out an existence and making its way in pretty interesting ways. It produces as much oil as the plant would if it were a big 6 foot tall plant with 22 to 24 leaves on it. But instead, it's about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, and it has about 100 leaves on the plant, and they're tiny. So it's producing the same amount of oil. It can't really muster the amount of nicotine, but there are not really any pests to speak of, so that's okay. And this oil basically acts as sunscreen, and the small leaves allow the trajectory of the sun as it moves across the sky to allow each little leaf to shelter its neighbor and get shelter from its neighbor throughout the day. So none of them are in this direct sunlight as they would be if the leaves were giant. So it's pretty amazing that this is functionally the same tobacco seed that we see perform in totally different ways in Virginia or in North Carolina or in Florida or in Georgia or in Tennessee or in Kentucky or in Louisiana. But in these totally different regions, the plant has responded by making its way in a totally different environment, and it's figured out how to do it. So Oriental is fascinating from that standpoint, but it's also fascinating because of the results that you get because of those physiological changes that the tobacco has had to opt for in order to exist. You have more oily uh, baking kind of spice element to the flavor profile. In Virginia's, we say that there's an element of baking spice sometimes, but the quantity of the tobacco oil is spread across a much larger volume of plant. Um, in the Oriental, it's a really oily tobacco, and it's baking in the sun, and it gives you these really vibrant, spicy and funky and nutty and floral notes. It's fascinating stuff. In the tobacco leaf side of things, uh, old tobacco guys don't even talk about Virginia or Burley or Oriental so much. They talk about flue cured, they talk about air cured, and they talk about aromatic. And when they say aromatic, they're talking about Oriental because that is the component that Oriental brings to bear without anything being added, without anything necessary to add. Oriental is naturally this aromatic, vibrant, complex uh, element to a blend, and it doesn't need topping or casing. And in fact, it's so oily, it won't accept those things. But it brings all of this unique olfactory sensation to any blend that includes it. The next tobacco is Perique. This is pure St. James Perique from our partner farms in Louisiana, 31 farms. Uh, this is a direct farm relationship that we have. It's the only tobacco that we purchase directly from one farm location. Um, and Perique is crazy. Perique is one of the tobaccos that, in my mind, it's sort of astonishing that it exists at all. This is tobacco that is grown in a region of the country that is prone to terrible storms. It is prone to all sorts of flooding and crazy muggy conditions. Right up against the Mississippi River is where this tobacco has always existed, and it goes back before the Cajuns were growing this Perique. It actually has its roots in Native American culture in that area. The Choctaw and the Chickasaw natives were growing their tobacco in this little 12 and a half square mile area of what is now Louisiana, and harvesting their tobacco, letting it wilt overnight, picking all the leaves off the stalk, dunking it in the Mississippi River, and then rolling it into little bundles and packing it in hollowed logs or hollow stumps, and using stones and saplings as levers and weights to apply pressure to this tobacco, or just burying an entire log stuffed with this tobacco and then rocks shoved in on top, burying it in the earth. They would do either of these things for about a year. And the tobacco would be transformed from sort of a ruddy brown tobacco that we might consider something like a burley to being this totally fermented black tobacco that has all of these aromatic components to it, chocolate and cherry, but also mushroom and hot sauce and soy sauce and fish sauce. It's really, really fascinating stuff. It ferments in this anaerobic environment under pressure. And by one way or another, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw understood this and carried out this practice over and over and over again without the biological or microbial understanding of what was happening. And Cajuns came along and saw this process and were fascinated. They'd never seen or smelled tobacco like this at all, and became obsessed with first buying it from the natives and then trying to understand how to make it more predictable as a process, because how much is one rock weigh and able to apply pressure versus another rock? How much tobacco can fit into one stump or one hollowed out log versus another? And so over time, this came to be the tobacco was packed into wooden boxes, and a standardized amount of tobacco could go into those wooden boxes. And then you would use rocks as weights, but you would chisel them down to be a standardized weight, and then you would use a lever system to apply pressure. Eventually, it became what's a hollowed out log or stump, but a barrel. And so packing a standard amount of tobacco, 500 pounds, into a 55-gallon ex-bourbon barrel, and then taking the idea that it is a fermented product and packing it into a barrel that had previously had fermented and distilled product in it to aid in that fermentation. And so along the way, the process has been changed, but really in small ways. Overall, looking at Perique production over the last 150 years, it's kind of the same. It's been the same nearly this entire time. Once there was a way to apply standard pressure, once there was a way to apply standardization to the volume of tobacco you were pressing, and understanding the increments, the intervals in which tobacco needed to be reintroduced, say, to oxygen. There's a turning process where you take tobacco back out of a barrel after pressure is applied for a period of time. This just reinvigorates the fermentation process by soaking back in oxygen and then putting it back in this anaerobic environment. So the Cajuns did some things to increase and make the process of fermentation more predictable, but overall, the idea has not changed dramatically. Perique is the rarest tobacco on earth. There are about 60 acres of Perique that is grown. By comparison, in the United States, there are 330 million pounds of Virginia tobacco alone grown in this country. And it's not even the largest tobacco producer anymore. The Virginia tobacco crop is actually now more produced in Brazil than in the United States. So Perique having just this little section, just this little tiny sliver of land where it's actually grown, and then the people who are actually processing it and doing things the old way, there are two. It is the rarest tobacco in the world, and to me, it has edged out an existence much like the Oriental, but on an even leaner scale. It has eked out an existence for 150 years. So I find Perique fascinating. I find Perique delicious. I find Perique important, and I find it compelling as a tobacco. But it also works so well with a tobacco like the Oriental, where it's playing on aromas and characteristics that are not necessarily just natural to tobacco. They're natural to tobacco in certain extreme conditions. Lastly, we've got another really extreme tobacco. And this one is maybe the most uh, divisive. Latakia. People either love it or hate it. There's very few people who are like, on Latakia. They have a strong opinion, and it's a strong aroma. It is a strong flavor. It is smoky, not smoky like Lapsang Souchong, where there's like a smoke element, but it's like honeyed and heathered, and there are other complexities going on, or like Scotch. It's smoky like you're sticking your face in the remnants of a campfire from last night while smelling your clothes saturated in the smoke from the campfire you were burning last night. It's intensely smoky. It has a powerful aroma that is immediately recognizable to those who are not smoking your pipe around you, and that will also be divisive. But for those of us who like strong or divisive or just in your face flavors, Latakia is wonderful. The aroma is wonderful. The smokiness is wonderful. So Latakia is another tobacco that I find amazing that it even exists. For the longest time, Latakia was sort of done in this accidental kind of way where you would hang your tobacco, your Oriental tobacco. So we're talking about Turkish tobacco, like the base we started with. You would hang your tobacco, and then you would just kind of go about life. And there would be fires that would be built and burned throughout the course of the year. And some of these agricultural fires would imbue the essence of smoke into the tobacco. And at some point, somebody thought, we could like make this more intense. We could make this more intentional. And so then you get into the idea of growing a tobacco crop, which is a labor-intensive thing to do in the first place, and you're doing it in a more arid climate. So you're doing a even more labor-intensive version of this already labor-intensive crop. But then you're hanging it on a wooden structure, closing it all up, and setting a fire underneath and going, hope everything goes well. It's incredible that people would choose to do this. And then they would do it for such long periods of time to really get the smoke penetration that we are traditionally familiar with in Latakia. It was 5 to 6 months, half a year of a continuously smoldering fire that you had to constantly have people tending to and maintaining and keeping just barely at a simmer. The same way that we smoke our pipes, right? But we do this for an hour and a half. Maybe if you're smoking a Magnum or something, it's like 3 hours. But we're talking about a process where you need an intense schedule of people or a total disrespect for whether or not those people sleep, to be able to keep this thing going. And along the way, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be flare-ups. You're going to lose product. And so the fact that Latakia has been produced and been producing this way for so long is kind of amazing. We have recently partnered with a company who is producing Latakia in Turkey, and they've seen some of the pitfalls associated with producing Latakia in this fire cured way, where you need to keep a smoldering fire going for 5 to 6 months. And they thought, how can we dial that down some, and how can we make the process a little more standardized, a little more foolproof? And so, rather than using wooden structures, they've thought, okay, there are barbecue smokers that can handle a slow, smoldering, smoke-heavy, heat-light environment for long periods of time. Can we take some pointers from this? There are also flue curing barns. So in Virginia, tobacco is flue cured. You use indirect heat. It's not in a smoky environment. It's not in an environment with fire, but you want the heat to be able to sort of quickly dry down the tobacco to set in sugars. Well, that used to be done with fire in barns that had flues or chimneys that ran all over the walls and floor of the barn. So we've modernized this to be done in aluminum barns that basically have computers that control the temperature and humidity inside that barn. You can essentially control the weather in there. You can make it storm if you want to. You can make it rain if you want to. And so you can program this thing to run a cycle of spiking heat at a certain time and gradually bringing it down, or gradually bringing heat up and then dropping it down quickly, to get different effects from flue curing. And so these Latakia producers in Turkey thought, can we take some notes, some ideas from the aluminum modern flue curing barn and combine those with modern smoker design and come up with something that can give us maximum smoke penetration and maximum smoke aroma and flavor in our Latakia, but without all of the guesswork and without all of the risk to the product, which is obviously costly. At 5 to 6 months of constantly working on something, if you lose it, that's a real loss. And so what they came up with was barns that are actually designed with dampers on the flue, so they can hold a certain amount of smoke pressure in before allowing some to release. Shelves that slowly rotate, like on a rotisserie, an offset firebox so that nothing is in direct flare-up path. And then they even designed a program so that it lets somebody know on their phone if the temperature spikes or if humidity drops or spikes. And so they can immediately respond to one unit versus another unit and know where their problems are. So through this, they've been able to take a process that consumed 400 pounds of wood a day and had to go for 5 to 6 months. And they've turned that into about 50 pounds of wood a day in pellets, and they've been able to reduce the process down to about 3 months. So all three of the tobaccos that go into Byzantium, Oriental tobacco, grown in a hostile environment, grown in an environment that's not ideal for tobacco. Perique, grown in a non-ideal environment for tobacco, and then goes through an intense, labor-intensive process. Most of the time, it's out of sight, so you have to guess about what's happening in there. The times where you pull the tobacco out, you have to make quick judgments about what has happened, what you want to happen, and how to achieve that next step. And then Latakia, that has gone through this intense, not only growing in an environment that's hostile and not necessarily the best for tobacco, but then on top of it, going through this intense fire curing process that's so ripe for error and ripe for mishap. A blend like Byzantium to me represents all sorts of converging amazingness. In my opinion, there are three tobaccos here by all accounts should not exist. But each one of them is special because of the lengths to which either the tobacco itself has gone or the people who grow it and love it have gone to make it possible that it exists. So we haven't even gotten into how this stuff tastes. And I already think that just on the virtue of the components that are put together, Byzantium is a noteworthy blend. So Turkish is aromatic, but it's mild in its nicotine value. It has a lot to offer in terms of aroma. It has a lot to offer in terms of sort of effervescent flavor that is there for a second and then just gone. Um, Perique is very, very full in nicotine. It's very rich in nicotine, but it also, through its anaerobic fermentation process, actually has been measured to have about 500 unique chemical compounds that react easily with air, that are volatile, that are not found on tobacco that has not gone through that fermentation process. So Perique is unique because of not only its strength, but also the olfactory sensations that it can bring. The volatile compounds that it has that offer flavors and aroma compounds that are totally unique. And then Latakia has this intense smokiness, but like Oriental, it doesn't have much in the way of strength. So really, Perique is here to aid in sort of the base note. It's aiding in a base in terms of strength. It's aiding in a base in terms of those complexities, but on a low level, on a heavy or deep level. And then you've got Latakia layering over the top of that with smokiness. Those of you who like to do barbecue, I like to think of Latakia in this blend as sort of that pink ring that you get on the outer edge of a slice of properly done brisket. That's your smoke ring. And then riding over the top of this is all of the aromatic complexity that Perique has to that Oriental has to offer. All of these notes of spice and citrus and lighter, brighter, sort of tenor and alto notes, and it comes together to be a really, really wonderfully complex blend. A complex blend made of complex processes, both by the tobacco plant and by the people who grow it, from tobaccos that, by all accounts, shouldn't exist. And that's Byzantium.